You're watching the DSP Leaders Summit on Edgeonomics, which looks at the operator economics that support the distributed telco cloud, or Telco Edge. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content at TelecomTV. Today's panel discussion is on edge investment strategies for telcos. Network operators are convinced they need edge computing capabilities to fulfill their service strategies. But to what extent will they need to invest in their own edge IT infrastructure? And if they do, what, where and why? Well, let me introduce our panelists. And joining us from France is Jehanne Savi, who is Senior VP of Innovation for Future Connectivity Business at Orange. From Spain, hello. We welcome Maria Cuevas, Principal Manager, Mobile and 5G Research Team at BT Labs. And joining from the US is Alex Resnick, HPE Distinguished Technologist, Telco, and Chair of the ETSI MEC ISG. Hello everyone, and good to see you all again. Let's get straight into the core of this discussion, no pun intended. The Telco Edge represents a tremendous opportunity, at least in theory. Now, to realise this opportunity, should telcos go it alone or should they partner? And let me ask you all this first question. To what extent will they need to invest in their own edge IT infrastructure? Jehanne, I'd like to ask you first that one.
So maybe I will just point out two words. Do they need specific infrastructure? Do they need specific investments? It's not the same. I mean, yes, indeed, specific infrastructure are needed, but maybe not on their own, let's say. And why? Because probably we must emphasize we have two different notions there that often we are mixing. It's what we call the telco cloud and what we call the edge computing. And I use different words also on purpose because we have here different usage. One is more for the telco services, the telco networking by itself, and is closer to the telco ecosystem. And the other one is for its business purpose. It's closer to the IT ecosystem. And so it's probably not the same strategy we could apply, including, of course, the partnership strategy. I guess we will come back on that point later. So my point is there. Let's be careful with what we are talking about. We have different stakes there with the telco cloud and the edge computing.
We do indeed. That's a very good point to make. I mean, we've been talking for what seems like years now about the different areas of where this edge actually is and what it actually means. But let's keep on this initial question about investing in telcos' own edge infrastructure. Alex, what's your view on that?
So I think the answer is yes to both. I think there's going to be, and there already is, an investment by telcos in their own edge infrastructure. And at the same time, there is increasing investment with partners in the edge infrastructure. And quite often you are seeing both emerging. So it's not an either or question to me. It's what is the right balance and the right trade-off for each particular telco, and it depends very much in the case of each particular telco on, I always say it's their current state, right, where they're now, and also what their strategy for what they want to become in the future and how they see their own future. And those two combinations are going to be very, very different for each particular communication service provider.
Thank you, Alex. Maria, what's your view about the extent to which telcos need to invest in their own edge infrastructure? Is it one size fits all, or is it very dependent, as Alex says, on individual telcos?
I fully agree with Alex. I don't believe there is a one size fits all. Even for a single telco, there'll probably be more than one answer. Let's remember, as you said earlier, there are many types of edge already being discussed in industry, driven by different requirements, different use cases, whether it's to be used for our own infrastructure and platforms, whether it's used to host third-party service providers. There will be a range of requirements with regards to integration with the network, or maybe areas where integration with the network will be less of a requirement. I think within that range of requirements and types of edge, there will be different solutions for different use cases. So the answer has to be there'll be a hybrid model where partnerships will and are starting to proliferate, but there is also a case for own infrastructure build, if that makes sense.
It does make sense indeed. Jehanne, as we have heard, there are a lot of variables when we talk about the edge and defining it and looking at the use cases. But when we talk about the need to partner on infrastructure, what is important here? Is it the physical assets? Are we talking about the platforms? Are there any obvious examples of best practices?
As we say, and I think we fully agree, the three of us on this point, we have different use cases and different configurations needed. So if we are talking about our own telco cloud for our own infrastructure, running our networks that will evolve to cloud-like architectures, then probably we need some partners from the telco side, and probably we should, or we are willing to keep the control about that. And it's something that is a long journey also, even though it's of course started, it has been started for years. It's a very long journey, and we will have hybrid configurations for a long time till we are, let's say, 100 cloud native telcos. But on the other side, if we are talking about the edge computing business, so for use cases that are more on the enterprise side to run business processes, then probably what would make the difference is not this asset, is not the willingness to keep the control on this infrastructure and services. Here, what will be the differentiating factor, what would be the key success factor is the attractiveness for the ecosystem, the attractiveness for the software developers, for the software vendors. And so here, that's why we consider that there's a key complementarity with the hyperscalers when we look for partnering with these hyperscalers. And as you know, Orange and Google has chosen to partner about that. To make this edge computing business happen together in Europe. So it's probably what I would emphasize as the key asset and the key complementarity between us here. It's this ecosystem attractiveness on one side and with the hyperscalers, and our ability from the telco side to bring the go-to-market, to bring the synergy with the connectivity, of course, which is key also in this real-time new value proposition.
Alex, to do this, can telcos use their existing assets or platforms or infrastructure, or do they need to upgrade or install new infrastructure, new technology? What's the best route forward that you're finding for telcos?
Depends on what you mean by existing assets and existing infrastructure. We've talked for a while about MEC being a kind of an on-ramp to 5G services, right? If you talk about, or if you think about 5G as ultimately being about the applications that you're able to deliver, as opposed to any particular spectrum, any particular waveform specification. And you look sort of at that set of specifications, you find that in many, many cases, you can deliver them over 5G with, provided over 4G, provided that you can provide the application a landing point for the services that have to be at the edge because of latency, because of other considerations, right? So if you're wondering, well, I am an operator, I'm kind of slow rolling my deployment into 5G, can I deliver these services? Yes, by and large, you can over your 4G air interface. So if that's what you mean by infrastructure, the answer is yes. Now, where are those application landing points? If you as an operator are heavily virtualized, and so you essentially have pools of compute located in your network, then you can either use your existing pools of compute or scale up the amount of compute, but essentially use the same infrastructure, more importantly, the same processes, the same way that you operate things, the same management plans, right? And start offering these edge services. If you're not heavily virtualized, if you are, if your radio access network, if your core network are heavily built on dedicated appliances that perform certain functions, then in order to offer edge compute, you have to deploy compute infrastructure, right? So either you deploy it in parallel or you use it as a reason to start virtualizing, but you do have to deploy that, and I shouldn't say compute, cloud infrastructure. Compute, networking, storage, all of that infrastructure, right? So it depends on where you are, I guess, in your virtualization NFV SDN journey as a service provider.
Maria, are you finding that as well, that the extent of your network transformation and virtualization directly correlates to what you can do and when with edge?
Completely. I think most operators across the globe, if not all, are at different stages of virtualization. But no matter where you are in that process, we're all headed in the same direction. But I fully agree with Alex that depending on where you are in that process, you may or may not already have a compute environment that is suitable for the deployment of edge cloud compute. However, there is maybe an additional consideration into this picture, which is, yes, of course, if we are down the road of virtualization, we are starting to build a certain degree of compute capacity. Most likely in the early days of the process will be mostly centralized and gradually, I suppose, increase in the degree of distribution, mainly driven by volumes. If we're honest, again, looking at the data volumes over our mobile networks, again, distribution is inevitable, regardless of whether or not those edge, low latency applications do appear in the market. So that's one direction. But what we're seeing is that as we further distribute our assets, and especially as you get closer to the edge, the actual environment will have different characteristics to your centralized maybe data centers. And therefore, there might be different characteristics with regards to cooling or to power or to size requirements that need to be taken into account as well.
Great. And Jehanne, you want to come on, follow up from what Maria's just said?
Yeah, but both Maria and Alex, by the way, mentioned the virtualization. And what I would like to emphasize is here we need to go a step further than the virtualization. That's why it's a very long way to go. It's a huge transformation for us, both for our operating model and for our business model. It's not only virtualization, it's up to the cloudification. We need to reach this state-of-the-art type of architecture and automation and as a service model than the hyperscalers are providing usually. And this on a specific set of requirements, maybe on a specific service level that is the one we need for our network functions. But here, I guess we have a further step to make, and this is kind of quantic gap now also. It's not so obvious when we just use the virtualization word. That's what I wanted to point out.
Great, thanks. And Alex, you want to follow up on this?
Yes, and I completely agree with that. I like to talk about kind of the three dimensions: the technology dimension, which you can, in an oversimplified fashion, think about as standing up a field trial, right? Getting a bunch of servers, getting a virtualized appliance, and standing up there, and now you have a field trial, right? The operational dimension, which is deploying this stuff at scale, and the business dimension, which is making the business work, right, as a service. The operational and the business dimension are much more challenging than the technical dimension. I think we as an industry, I mean, people know how to buy servers from places like my employer, right? There's vendors that provide virtualized appliances, but it used to be, even a year back, I used to ask people, well, once you've deployed this really distributed cloud at the edge and one of your servers goes down, how do you know it? I think we've passed kind of those simple questions, but the operational dimension, both understanding how do you automate the initial deployment across a cloud, and then, but even more challenging, how do you monitor what's going on, understand what the problem is, understand what the corrective action is in a highly decentralized environment where you can't have human interaction probably at every single one of those steps. That's a problem. And then also aligning the business model. If you are doing business with your customers on an as-a-service basis, that means that you probably want your vendors, your partners, right, that whole business model down to the physical infrastructure to be offered on an as-a-service basis, right? And that's not in itself necessarily straightforward, right? You just like the operators have to change the way they do business in some ways, right? Everybody downstream in some ways has to change to how they do business to evolve to this kind of an as a service way of doing things.
As you say, Alex, this is the very nature of the edge is it's highly distributed. Maria, in the work that you do, are you finding that this is it's an extension of what you've done before? It's like an evolution, or is it a bit of a rethink as to how you manage, how you automate in this really new environment of the edge?
I completely agree, and I was nodding as Alex was talking about. I suppose the operational aspects and the business aspects of edge cloud compute environments, and as these environments become more highly distributed, as you say, it becomes more of a challenge to manage that distributed environment, to dynamically allocate capacity, which is of course smaller in scale, and therefore it is increasingly important that you allocate the capacity where it's needed and when it's needed, and all of that again introducing new challenges with regards to things like orchestration, management, and automation. So one thing I was going to highlight earlier, and I didn't, is that I suppose the way we increasingly automate our networks, and again, all the capabilities with regards to orchestration and full automation are much more fundamental and relevant even to whether it's who owns the infrastructure or even whether it's new or old hardware that you need to use. There is a fundamental shift in the way we do things, in the way we manage, monitor, secure our networks, and it is a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. It requires a lot of collaboration across a number of industry players. And we're starting to see that happening, but there is a long journey ahead of us.
Now, this is a perfect lead into a question I've got for Jehanne. In previous events and conferences, you've been critical about the difficulties of onboarding VNFs and this whole NFV process, the time and the money involved. I'd just like to ask, in your experience, has this process now improved? And if so, does this new ease of onboarding, does it help with edge deployments and strategies, especially with regards to the issue of automation and orchestration?
Yes, indeed. I think we have made some progress about this onboarding stuff, especially because we are now dealing with CNF, meaning network functions in containers, and not, strictly speaking, VNF as used to be. So maybe it's a step to this ease. What is a significant move, also an achievement as a community and as an ecosystem, is that we have really converged on the necessity to reach a kind of de facto standard to make the model sustainable. And when I say sustainable, I mean economically sustainable. So if we want to have this type of model that we see with the hyperscalers, I mean the marketplace of VNFs and CNFs that we can onboard like one-click usage, then we need to have this de facto standard so that the developers are able to certify their applications, their network functions, and to make this marketplace model just possible. And that's where initiatives such as the CNTT inside the GSMA is significant and is a real improvement and a real collective move that is almost mandatory to make this value chain sustainable once again. So I think we have seen, yes, things really improved in the past years. And so we are now, as also a community, able to pursue this model that we see with hyperscalers, this model of marketplace of cloud native applications.
Something you talked about, the community work and various initiatives as part of your answer there, Jehanne. Maria, I wonder, what value are these community projects when we look at the edge, when telcos look at the edge? Because there's a lot of community projects, like TIP, for instance, has its TX, and I believe BT is heavily involved with those. Do they have a positive role to play in edge strategies?
Absolutely. We firmly believe in the value of collaboration at many levels. And sometimes it might feel like there is too much going on, and obviously you have to choose which alliances or fora you can join or should be joining or putting your efforts into. On the other hand, I do believe that there is a lot of effort in alignment and again collaboration across those industry activities to make sure that different initiatives are focusing on different challenges. So, for instance, if just taking TIP as an example, we have been members of TIP for quite some time. We do see the value in a lot of the community lab activities, and we have taken part and continue to take part in many of those to do with whether it's interoperability events between different partners. Maybe not so much in the edge cloud compute, but for instance, right now we have a lot of activity in areas like ORAN, and obviously edge cloud compute has a role to play within that. But anything to do with trying to, I suppose, a particular challenge from a particular perspective and making sure that industry is aligned on the direction and where we're trying to go. We do believe that without those initiatives, and especially as we move towards a world where architectures are more open, we're moving to this cloud native world, which again implies involvement from many different parts of the ecosystem. Collaboration is even more important than ever before.
Great. And Alex, you're chair of one of the leading industry bodies here, the ETSI MEC ISG. What drives your work direction? Your member base, it's the members who tell you where to look at, but what's driving your work direction as telcos look at their edge investment models? So,
2 areas, right? And if you look at the structure of our output, it really is geared around those 2 areas, right? One is the area that we talked a lot about, which is automation and enabling the push to that automation out to the edge. Now, we are a standards group, so just like any other standards group, we don't provide solutions. We enable people to do things in an interoperable way. But if you look at what ETSI NFV has done for the NFV marketplace, and we build a lot on what we built primarily in the automation side on what they've done, right? The idea is you need to be able to do that as you go to the edge as well. The other area is really enabling a wide and broad developer ecosystem. When you look at cloud developers, and I mean developers of not NFVs, but actually sort of traditional apps that consumers use, what they see today and what they can work with today is a hyperscaler model, which provides a de facto standard, right? And so maybe they start with one, and maybe they'll scale up to 2 or 3 as their business grows, right? But with that one, they can get an almost global and almost universal reach to all of their potential customer base. You need to do the same thing for telco, but you need to do it in a way where you recognize that you have hundreds of telcos around the world. None of them, not even the biggest guys, can get anywhere near to a universal, both in terms of a particular area and geographically, reach of the potential customer base an application developer will be interested in. At the same time, the application developers just simply can't scale to develop apps that interact with different APIs, with different interfaces that each telco might offer. So you have a clear need for a standard in the way that you interact with application developers, right? And so that's the other area that ETSI MEC offers, right, is the standards that complement what may already be going on by looking at very telco-specific things and defining a unified way for the telcos in the world to interact with application developers.
Great. I've got a final question I'd like to ask each of you. The edge environment has been quite chaotic up till now. I was wondering, has the landscape of edge strategies, is it still fragmented, or is there some consensus amongst the telcos as to what strategies are making the most sense? Are we seeing a convergence of approaches, or are we still seeing a lot of different ideas, different strategies, depending on the telco, depending on the use cases? Jehanne, what are you seeing across the industry?
I would say yes and no. Let me explain my point. Maybe we can see some type of homogeneous partnerships or a way to manage the strategic move towards the edge computing business with partnerships with hyperscalers. So this is the side of the business, and we see also a kind of homogeneous or consensus around the fact that for our telco cloud, we need maybe something more specific, and we need to reach a de facto standard, as Alex make it clear. And so I suspect we have a type of consensus there, both on this edge type of strategy for the business and for the telco needs. On the opposite, I suspect that what is not clear in the ecosystem and where we are real fragmented is when we talk about what we consider as bankable use cases, bankable verticals. What's the value for the latency? So then what is the good trade-off between my extra investment going to the edge? Of course, there's an overhead cost to deploy distributed infrastructure versus centralized infrastructure. So there is a trade-off between this overhead cost and the value proposition that the market would be willing to pay for with closer capabilities, so better latency and things like that. So, and that's where we are not clear as an ecosystem, and of course we have different views. And probably it's also because the market is not mature enough, is not predictable enough. So it's just a kind of process, and it's where we can really consider it's a strategic move that we are making when we are willing to develop this business and to enter this market of the edge computing.
Thank you, Jehanne. Great points. Alex, what about yourself? Are you seeing a wide range of strategies here, or are you at least seeing some commonality?
I'm going to be in a kind of a similar yes or no camp, and just kind of add to what Jehanne was saying. I'm seeing a convergence in the acceptance of the fact that I think most telcos are going to have a hybrid approach, right? So they're going to have several different things going on. So instead of asking, what is the right MEC solution for me to go with, they're saying, okay, I think I'm going to need that. I think I'm going to need that. I think I'm going to need that. Let me make sure that I can deploy a mixture of these different approaches, right? And some of them might involve hyperscalers, some of them might involve something that's homegrown, some of them might involve something that's standardized around the ETSI set of specs and sort of the NFV ecosystem. So there is a convergence towards that. Right. I think what that does then is drive the problems sort of down. Okay, so I can deploy all of these things, but what do I actually deploy? And again, that goes back to the point that Jehanne made, which is you need to see the money and you need to follow the money. And I think what most people are doing is they're looking for opportunities. Those are going to be different for each operator. And then they're bootstrapping their deployments to those opportunities, right? So the mix of, or the relative weight of the mix that you see people putting out on the field is very much bootstrapped to where they're seeing the opportunities.
Thank you, Alex. And Maria, from your perspective at BT Labs, what's the message that's coming to you? What are you seeing? Are you seeing a yes and no here? You know, is it still so variable?
Yeah, I would like to agree, I suppose, with both answers before, and maybe add a bit more on the perspective again and the different angles to this question. I actually think that this question can be looked at least from three perspectives. So on the one hand, there is obviously, as we said earlier, operators following our own journey towards virtualization and cloud native environments, and that's for our own use. You might refer to that as own use, right? So regardless of whether we start highly centralized and you know, potentially gradually distribute, it is all part of a journey towards migrating our platforms to become programmable, distributed compute environments where we can deploy our network functions. So I would say that's one, if you like, big chunk of work, and we're seeing, again, it's a journey, as I said earlier, and we're seeing best practices, but we have a long way to go in terms of, you know, as we were saying earlier, the way we manage those networks, secure them, and operate them. So that's one thread. The second thread, and obviously we've mentioned the hyperscalers a few times during today's discussion. I would say, to be honest, that that's nothing new. We've had CDN caching and you know, the various type of content caches within our networks for quite some time, and the new wave of hyperscaler you know, partnership announcements is pretty much an extension of, you know, the public edge cloud. And again, as Jehanne was saying, you know, great for attracting, if you like, that mass of application developers out there. So that's another thread, and I suppose we do know how those are, and we will continue to see a proliferation of partnerships in that space. And the third thread, and I think Jehanne was referring to that earlier as well, is you know, the new set of initiatives to try and bring the telcos together to figure out how we can collectively join forces and provide a way to expose our network capabilities to third parties. And I talk about network capabilities and not just edge, because I see edge being almost the start of a journey. There are many more enablers, you may call them, with 5G, like network slicing, that we all know about, etc., which are likely to become very valuable assets that telcos want to monetize. And in order to do that, we need to figure out, again, how to expose them to potential customers. So I would say that third thread is very different to the other two. It has a very different set of requirements and drivers. And yes, initiatives like the GSMA Telco Edge Cloud, but many others, again, where I suppose we're all headed in the right direction, or in the same direction, hopefully the right direction as well, to be able to expose capabilities, to federate capabilities between operators. Let's forget that the future of roaming is obviously about to become a lot more complex, and we need to figure out how these network slices work across international boundaries. So all those things do need to be sorted out. Edge plays a very important role in all that, but there are many other capabilities that need to come together to make that happen. So I would just categorize that as a third thread, if you like, evolving. And yes, we are starting to see initiatives, but again, a long journey ahead of us in that space.
Great points. Well, we're at the end of our allotted time, unfortunately. But Maria, Alex, and Jehanne, thank you all very much indeed for joining us. A reminder that we have many more interviews, panel discussions, and analysis programs as part of the Edgeonomics Summit, and they are all here to view on TelecomTV. We also have a live Q&A program, which is coming up at 4:30 p.m. UK time today, where we will be taking your questions. There's a form here on the website that you can use. You can send your questions in now. You don't have to wait until the Q&A program starts. There's also a calendar reminder link you can use so that you can add the session to your calendar software and receive a local time zone reminder. But for now, thank you very much for watching, and we do hope to see you again very soon.